If I had to pick one sentence to sum up that morning, it would be this. I woke up, walked into my kitchen, and the world had a perfectly round hole in it where my garage used to be. Not wrecked, not blown apart, just gone like somebody had erased the piece of my life that still smelled like paint and coffee and left a neat invoice in the wind to show they'd done me a favor. Inside that garage was Sarah's studio, the last painting she'd been working on before cancer stole her hands away. And for 15 years that room was the only place in the house that still felt like her easels. By the windows, paint under every fingernail, coffee rings on the workbench like small stubborn signatures. I stood on the exposed slab barefoot, October air biting my ankles, and watched a bright orange citation flap like a mocking flag. Emergency structure removal safety hazard authorized by Maple Grove HOA Compliance Office, and behind it stapled cold as a bank statement, removal services $1,200. Administrative processing $350. Pay in 30 days or face more penalties. They'd turned the last shelter of her life into a line item and expected me to write the check. Shock did its slow work for a while, the kind that makes time sticky. Then anger crept in like a slow heat that finally burns through when you let it. Garages don't disappear overnight without permits, without paperwork, without someone with a stamp and a signature deciding you don't matter enough to call first. I'd spent 30 years hauling other people's disasters off the road at 2 in the morning, twisted metal, overturned lives, and I learned a few things doing that. One of them, when somebody tries to make you disappear without a hearing, it's because they think you'll stay quiet. Sarah painted the way some people breathe easy, constant, necessary. Her last piece was a Vermont landscape from our honeymoon. She'd nearly finished the sky, then ran out of breath and never picked the brush back up. After she died, I left everything as it had been: the coffee mug with dried paint on the handle, the palette stiff as old candy, her jacket on the stool. The garage was a shrine in the softest sense, not for show, but for the way it kept her alive in the world that kept moving. And someone decided that cluttered, imperfect living memory didn't fit the neighborhood's aesthetic. That someone had a name. Bethany Kensington Mills, perfect hair, a pale pink blazer, a clipboard like a war flag slid into the HOA, and quicker than anyone voted, she was in charge of compliance. She didn't raise her voice. She spoke slowly so folks would fill in the blanks themselves, and she pointed a projector at my garage during a meeting and said, "Consistency protects property value." People nodded. That was one of her superpowers, not to pick fights so much as manufacture quiet pressure until everyone agreed she'd already won. 3 days after she first noticed my garage, a neat, polite notice was taped to my door. Non-conforming accessory structure, 14 days to comply. I went to the county records. Margaret at the permits desk pulled out the old folder stamped and legal. Since 1987, nothing had changed. The county had never been called, but the letters kept coming: setback review, roofing material compliance, sightline obstruction, and neighbors who used to wave now just nodded and kept their distance. Bethany was doing her work and doing it with surgical silence. I installed cameras not to spy, but to document. 2 days later, a deputy came by after a neighbor complained about surveillance aimed at a house. He watched the feed, shrugged, and told me to keep recording. That night, orange cones and a laminated fire lane no parking sign showed up across my driveway. The fire chief pulled it down himself. He hadn't issued it. Still, the pressure built, and I realized by then it wasn't just about a gaudy little garage, it was about control. Bethany wanted me gone, and she was busy learning how to make that happen without anyone noticing the hands on the levers. I almost missed the next scene because I'd gone out of town for my daughter Katie's birthday weekend. Good thing she made me leave. Sunday night I came home and the slab was open to the sky. Tire tracks, splintered wood, drywall dust like dry snow, a smear of blue paint as if someone had dragged a brush through dirt. Another citation stake was hammered into the ground: emergency removal, immediate hazard, signed by Maple Grove. And I felt the world tilt in a way grief had exhausted me into not expecting anymore. I drove to the county transfer yard because of course I did. That's what people who move broken things do, look for the pieces. In the construction debris pile, I found a torn strip of canvas with a familiar blend of green and gold. Vermont. The scrap breathed life back into reality. This wasn't HOA paperwork and passive-aggressive parking anymore. It was deliberate destruction. The next morning I waded through county files, fire reports, in the deputy's office. None of them had issued emergency inspections. Then I sat finally ready and watched my camera footage. October 14th, 11:42 p.m. Headlights, work lights, a demolition crew with no city markings. Hydraulic arms, 2 trucks, methodical work. At 2:54 a.m., the last piece was loaded and they drove off. One truck's side reflected in the security light, Iron Horse Hauling. Iron Horse. 3 years earlier, I'd bought that name and its routes when the old owner retired, folded it into Alley Recovery's commercial division, and left the sign. Because who cares about faded signage when you're busy running a small business? I almost dropped the laptop when I froze the frame and saw that logo. If Iron Horse hauled my garage, then somewhere was a work order, a payment, a voice recording. Paperwork, the thing Bethany relied on to feel like she was right, had a way of telling the truth when people forgot to be careful. I went into my company's dispatch system the way someone walks a crime scene. There it was, October 14th, residential structure failure priority, immediate client authorization, Maple Grove Residential Association, attention compliance office, authorized by B. Mills. I pulled the call recording. Her voice was in my speakers, calm and crisp. This is an emergency situation. The structure poses an immediate safety hazard and must be removed tonight. Billing to Maple Grove, HOA attention, Bethany Kensington Mills, payment deposited 3 days later. Listening to her sign a work order that erased my wife's studio felt like watching a surgeon stitch up evidence into a neat package. She had paid my own subsidiary to clean up the crime, unaware, or maybe not caring that the ledger would one day be read by the family who lost everything. I printed the files, called Rita at dispatch, and for the first time in months, something that wasn't grief or anger clicked into place, clarity. Bethany had done this before, landscapers, boats, dumpsters. Always the same language: emergency, safety concern, community compliance. She'd built herself an authority by pretending it existed. I could have gone loud, yelled at meetings, called the news. But the work I'd done my whole life taught me that loud gets attention for a moment, and then it's gone. Paper lasts. I made 3 copies of the folder, one for legal, one for my safe, and one to bring to the block party. Because if you're going to expose a system, you do it where the people who let it happen are watching their own neighbors. The fall block party, normally tables and chili and kids with leaf-strewn footballs, suddenly felt like the perfect place to turn the lights on. Saturday morning came crisp, the kind of sky that makes everything look peaceful even when it's not. Bethany's Escalade started parking in a way that blocked my driveway a little longer every day, the kind of passive maneuver she used to test boundaries. At 11:30, she rolled it in and sat like she owned the space. I called Rita. "It's time," I said. She understood without questions. An Iron Horse truck turned onto Maple Grove Drive like any other service vehicle, diesel steady, not dramatic. People noticed. When the driver stepped out with his clipboard and read the removal notice aloud, the block party went quiet. I pressed play on my phone and let Bethany's voice fill the cul-de-sac. The structure poses an immediate safety hazard and must be removed tonight. I laid out county records, fire department logs, the dispatch tape. Her face went still like a photograph, finally realizing it wasn't staged. Jerry, the driver, hooked the Escalade and lifted it right off her driveway while the neighborhood watched. Deputy Rodriguez took the folder and started asking questions that weren't rhetorical anymore. The moment wasn't cinematic in the way movies make justice look. It was quieter, more like balance returning to a scale that had been tipped for too long. No triumphant music, no gloating, just a slow, inevitable reordering. Bethany resigned through her lawyer a few weeks later. Investigations rolled forward, some civil suits, some criminal reviews, a lot of paperwork, finally meeting people who couldn't pretend it was only about aesthetics. The HOA reformed. Neighbors started talking again instead of nodding. They reimbursed reconstruction costs. They started the Sarah Alley Memorial Art Fund with leftover settlement money and donations, small art scholarships, supplies for schools, weekend classes at the rec center. Nobody gave me a statue or a parade, just a brass plate set into the new studio's polished slab that reads her name. In early spring, when the new studio finally went up, I carried her easel back in and set it where the light always fell. Same direction, same quiet morning blessing, and the first brush stroke I made after all that felt like remembering how to use my hands. If there's a lesson here, it isn't dramatic or righteous sounding. It's simple. When people try to use rules as a weapon, the rules can also be the way to stop them. Truth doesn't have to shout to be heard. It just has to be where people can see it. And there's another truth that sits next to it. People who believe power is the ability to rearrange other people's lives for their comfort rarely realize the permanence of consequences until those consequences knock on their own door. 3 years later, I don't spend much time thinking about Bethany. Not because I forgave her or forgot her, but because she stopped mattering. She was a symptom, not the point. Sometimes I sit in the studio with coffee and listen to the quiet. Sometimes I paint a crooked line of trees and call Katie afterward. The grandkids still ask if Grandpa's fixing trucks or painting like Grandma. Sometimes it's both. Some mornings the light hits the floor and for a moment I swear she's just stepped out for a minute. So here's a question I want you to chew on. When is doing the right thing just enforcing rules, and when does it become something more like weaponized civility? And if you've ever been on the receiving end of someone who used authority to push you out, how did you respond? Did you fight back, walk away, or find a way to turn their own tools into evidence? Tell me your take, were they right? Was it justice or was something uglier going on? Drop your story in the comments. Share what you think about power and who it belongs to. And if you've got a moment, tell someone you know to keep an eye on how rules are being used in their own neighborhood.
Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video.